Alright guys, so earlier in class today we were talking about the Shang and the Zhao. Tonight I want to focus on the Qin and the Han. Some of this might be a review from class today, but some of it will be new. I definitely encourage you to take some notes. You don't have to, that is your choice, but it will help you tomorrow during your review quiz. So, starting off, again, just to review, we talked about this in class today, but that mandate of heaven idea is central and key and super important for each of these dynasties. And the mandate of heaven, just a reminder, is that the Chinese kings, their right to rule comes straight from heaven. The God chose a wise person to rule. When the mandate passes from one person to another, that's when we get that change of dynasty in their eyes. Is no longer is one ruler suited and chosen to rule, but now someone else is. They get the mandate of heaven instead. Also, we talked about at the end of the Zhao dynasty, that period of the warring states. So this map is just the different warring states that existed after the fall of that Zhao dynasty. And just a reminder, each of these states ruled itself. There was no unified government, similar to the city-states we talked about in Greece, but much larger. So instead of each city ruling, it was more of like a tribe, and that tribe owned a large portion of land. So China was in this period of warring states where the states just constantly fought against each other. Each of these groups was always at war with one or multiple or more than one of these other groups. This lasted about 200 years, all the way up until finally the Qin dynasty defeated all the other states. So the ruler of the Qin named himself the ruler of all China and changed his name to the Qin Shi Huangdi. That's how you say that one, Shi Huangdi. And his main goal was to unify China. And he did this through a very, very strict rule, such as the government kept an eye on their workers, things like that. If you did anything that disagreed with him, you would definitely be punished quickly and fiercely. So don't cross him. It would be bad. Life during this dynasty, during the Qin dynasty, was very different. This is where we start to see a lot of things come out, not a lot of new technologies and things like that. First off, this is the first time we see a common currency, not just in China, but in the world. So finally, there's a common currency or type of money. Also, we had a central writing system. All these different tribes, all these different warring states had different ways of writing. And finally, because of the Qin, they unified that to make a common writing. Also, he built large palaces, large roads, a large number of canals and dams as well. Most famous, though, for the building of a large tomb, where in the tomb you have these terracotta, which is kind of like a clay, what your flower pots are made out of usually. Terracotta soldiers that would guard the emperor in death. And that's what that picture is down there. A picture of those soldiers. It's pretty neat to go see. One of those things I would love to go see one day. However, he also started a large wall, which we know as the Great Wall of China. And the wall was mainly to keep out these nomad warriors called the Xiongnu, which lived in the north, right above China, and they were always trying to cause some issues similar to the Vandals and the Visigoths in Rome. However, the Qin dynasty, as great as it was, did not last long after his death. So in 210 BCE, his dynasty kind of dies out along with the Qin ruler. It is followed by the Han dynasty, and the first emperor of the Han dynasty is Han Wudi. And again, with this changing of dynasties, the idea is that the mandate has passed from the Qin to the Han. So now you have these other people. Also, between the two time periods, you also had a lot of wars. So finally, the Han is able to rise up. So Han Wudi was the first emperor of the Han dynasty. He was greatly known for improving the government. One of the ways he did that is through enacting what are called civil service exams. So what you would do is that you would take a test, and that test would declare if you were smart enough to work in government. If you failed the test, you wouldn't get a government position, which today doesn't sound like a big deal, but at this time, it was the government officials that made the bulk of the money. So, schools were created that taught students how to pass these tests. They prepared them for these civil service exams. And there have been ideas of doing this in America today because it worked so well. The government worked so much better under this. However, what ended up happening with this is that only the rich people ended up in government because it was very expensive to send your son to school to begin with, because now they can't farm, but also the school costs a lot of money. But also during his rule, the population of China grew dramatically, exploded. We had so many more people during his rule, also due to tenant farming, which helped have better food and better working conditions. So because we have more food, we can have more people. That's the whole idea. Now, life during this was definitely an era of peace. I would say this would be one of the many golden ages of China, because if you have peace, you have more time to do things that you wouldn't normally have time to think about. You can think about literature, you can think about arts, you can think about doing things that you enjoy. Also Confucian, or the ideas of Confucius, which we'll talk about in class tomorrow, those ideals will spread a lot faster because people now have time to devote to religion. Also, we have more time for people to sit and invent, so a lot of new technology. For instance, the ship rudder and ship sails were invented during this time period in China. Also water wheels, and water wheels are very helpful for grinding grain down and things of that nature. So finally, a water-powered way to make things smaller and to make things more compact without having to do it by hand. Also, the wheelbarrow was invented during this time period. And then most importantly, silk and paper. Paper is super important because this allows them to keep documents and to keep historical records. This is why we don't have a lot of historical records before a certain time period in history that you guys talked about when you talked about Egypt. But before that, before papyrus in Egypt, we didn't have a lot of history written down because there wasn't anything to write it on. Silk will also change the way things work because of the Silk Road. When, for instance, Alexander the Great came to India, he noticed all these goods that the Indians had that Rome did not, that Greece did not. So when those Roman soldiers came in off of his trail, the Romans saw things they didn't have either. So trade during this time period greatly increased during the Han Dynasty. Also due to Chinese generals would go out and they scouted around, they actually found the fact that there are other civilizations other than theirs. One of the things they noticed that they really liked were horses. Horses are very helpful, especially in war. It's a lot faster mode of transportation than walking on your own feet. So China would trade their silk, which was a very fine garment, very, very luxurious, nothing that had been seen before that, like silk. So they would trade silk for horses. These roads that they traveled to get the horses and to trade the silk became known as the Silk Road. Later on, they'll use it to trade spices as well. But this starts one of the major networks of trade routes that you'll even hear about next year in history in 9th grade. But these trade routes stretch from China all the way to the Mediterranean. So we're talking Greece, Rome, Egypt, that area. Very important. However, it kind of led to the end of Chinese culture. With any type of trade, you automatically lose culture because of cultural blending. And cultural blending is just that mix of cultures. It's the reason why we have Chinese restaurants, why we have Mexican restaurants. Also the reason why there are McDonald's in France. Things like that. So because of these silk roads, not just silk and horses are traveling on it, also ideas and rebels. Buddhism being one of the main ideas that traveled along the road. We talked about Buddhism in India, and remember how it kind of died out because of Hinduism, just kind of absorbed it. Well, those Buddhists that were very strictly Buddhist began to share their ideas with these travelers on the Silk Road. And so it began to leak in and to spread to China, which is a good thing, but not a good thing at the same time because it was very different than the way China typically ran. It caused more people to question some of the things going on in government. Also, after Han Wudi died, there were a string of weak rulers in the Han Dynasty. And because of that, rebels came down the Silk Road. And because the ruling class is weak, just like we saw with Rome, it was easily destroyed. So the capital was destroyed in 190 CE. And then again, we have more civil war back to our period of the Warring States. So we're kind of going back to where we began with this. So we're going to pick up with that thought a little bit later next week. But just to kind of keep that in mind, the fact that there's always this mandate of heaven idea that passes from one dynasty to another. So the mandate passed from the Qin to the Han, and now it has left the Han. And we'll revisit the dynasties next week to kind of see where does that mandate go from here. Tomorrow in class, we're going to take a short little quiz. It'll be real easy, like 5-question quiz, just to make sure you were paying attention. And then we're going to explore some Chinese culture. It'll be a really fun day. So I'll see you guys tomorrow.